Hello everybody and welcome to INE's Introduction to VMware vSphere 6.0. My name is Rob Riker and I will be your instructor for this course. I am a CCIE in Routing and Switching, a CCNA in Security, and I hold a VMware Certified Associate and VMware Certified Professional 5.5, both in Data Center Virtualization. What this course is going to be covering is all the details that you will need if you are planning on taking the VMware Certified Associate 6 Data Center Virtualization exam. This exam is designed for those of you that are looking to break into the VMware industry from the ground up. If you are interested in taking the exam, here are the details for that. We are going to be going through this exam in a top-down fashion, meaning we're going to start with the most basic implementation. We're going to take a look at a high-level overview of each of the technologies, and then as we hit each technology, I will show you how the technologies work and a couple of different characteristics for each one of them. Now, the exam information you're looking for, the exam number, is 1V0601. This is a $120 US exam. It's 75 minutes long, 50 questions, and a passing score of 300. It is a single and multiple choice question and answer exam. It is non-proctored. What that means to you and me is when you take the exam, for this particular exam, you get to take that from the comfort of your own home. So you don't have to go to a Pearson VUE or a Prometric testing center to take this test, which is very, very convenient for some people. I am fortunate there happens to be a Pearson VUE testing center about 15 minutes from where I live. That is not the case for everybody. So I understand that this is a convenience factor as well. Now, when you get into the VCP level, which I also have taken and passed, that requires you to go to a Pearson VUE testing center, and that is a proctored exam. All proctored means is when you get to the testing center, there is an individual that is running that testing center that will help you register, log in, get everything situated, and go from there. I'm not going to go into much of the details on how the actual format of that goes because it does vary from testing center to testing center. Without any further ado, let's get into the topics we're going to be covering as we go through this, and we'll get into the meat and potatoes of what we're actually going to be covering. Now, the topic domains here, there's two of them. The first one of which is going to be explain data center virtualization concepts and identify typical data center virtualization challenges. The second of which is going to be identify, explain, and differentiate vSphere technologies. Now, the way we're going to break this out is we're going to be talking about the technologies. We're going to start off with the basics of what is data center virtualization, that type of stuff, and then we're going to get into why you would need it, what are some of the characteristics about it, and then the details behind them. So when you first get into an ESXi environment, and I'll show you my environment real quick, and then I'll show you how we are going to progress through our particular series and how we're going to go about doing things. And if you're not sure on what you may or may not see, that's okay. Every video is going to have a specifically named title, so it'll be easy for you to figure out where you want to zero in on your time. So if you don't need to know why data center virtualization is out there, that's fine. You can skip that video and go on to the next one. They will be uniquely identified. The other benefit to this is I will show you how to install the majority of the products that we're going to be using. I'll show you how to do a full install of an ESXi hypervisor into a virtual environment. I will also show you how to get the vSphere client operational, as well as the vSphere web client and vCenter server. vCenter server and vSphere web client are basically a package installation, and I'll break down how that works. So I've actually already got a vCenter implementation running, and I'm actually going to show you that here in just a moment. I'll show you my virtual environment so you know what you need. And I'll go over some of the very minimum requirements needed to get some of this stuff operational, and then we'll take a look at that from there. Most of what we're going to be covering here is going to be high level. So we're not going to do any real deep dives into any one particular technology. So that is not this course. If you want to know more about it, check out the VCP course once it comes out, and those technologies will be covered in much, much more detail. So here we're going to be going over the high level stuff. So what is DRS? What is vSphere? What is vMotion? What is a vSphere standard switch? Things like that. So that when you are done with this particular course, you can feel confident that you can go sit down for the VCA exam and successfully take and pass that. So now that I've gone over that, let's go take a look at our virtual environment. And this happens to be my personal ESXi host. Now my ESXi host, and let me go ahead and break out the magnifier so it's a little easier for you guys to see this. So here we have our vSphere environment. So this happens to be my personal ESXi host. So I'm actually running, let me go click on the host here. And right now I'm currently running an IBM server. This is a 3650 M2 with approximately 64 gigs of RAM on it. So that's what the 64 gigs of RAM looks like. And I've got 2 Xeon processors. So I have 2 sockets and 4 cores per socket with a possibility of running at 16 logical processors. It gives me a lot of flexibility to do a lot of processing on this particular host. So a lot of capabilities here. Now, a lot of what we're going to be covering here is going to be the high level, like I've already mentioned. So I'm not going to go into the details of, how vSphere looks at your processor and all of that type of stuff. That's outside of the scope for this exam. What we are going to be taking a look at is what is supported, what is not supported. So I will be taking you out in this video to the VMware site, and I will show you the hardware compatibility list. Basically what the HCL does is the HCL is a way for you to test whether the hardware you either have currently or about to buy will support what your virtual environment you want to run. So basically at the end of the day, what that gives you the ability to do is, let's say you go out and you buy I work in a Cisco shop, so we run a lot of Cisco UCS. So for instance, a B series server. And so what we did is we went out and we hit the HCL up and we said, okay, we went to the HCL and we typed in all of the configuration that we had going on for our server, and then it told us what capabilities we'd be able to run in a virtual environment. So is ESXi even supported to run on that hardware? And all that HCL basically does is VMware takes all these different vendor platforms, Dell, HP, Cisco, IBM, and whatnot. They bring them into their environments and they install ESXi on top of them, and they run as a bunch of different variations of the implementation. So they install it, they run install vCenter. Is it manageable? Can they do everything they need to? What are the performance metrics look like? And then from there, they basically say, okay, this particular server, this IBM server, is supported or is not supported. There were some bugs in this, there were some bugs in that. We're still working on trying to figure this or that out. That's where some of these updates come from that you'll see. Like there'll be little patches and things like that that'll come out from VMware. So that's where that type of stuff comes into play. So as we go through here, you'll see all that stuff in a lot more detail. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up our virtual environment, and what we have going on here now is the computer that I'm actually clicking on right now is the computer that we will be utilizing to demo all of our virtual product capabilities. So this Windows 7 computer is a virtual machine running inside of my ESXi host. This basically would be the equivalent of you running a laptop or a desktop and installing a VMware workstation. So let me go grab my my pen pad here, and let me kind of just break down how this is actually going to work. And let me turn my magnifier off for just a moment so you guys can see how this works. So the general idea behind this is actually pretty simple. Bring my mouse back onto the screen here. So the way this works is, normally what you would do is you would have a computer. So I'm just going to draw a computer here on the screen. This computer would, whatever operating system, we'll say Windows 7. I've had very good luck with Windows 7 running VMware Workstation and testing all the capabilities in ESXi out. So you would take your Windows 7 computer and then you would install VMware Workstation on top of that. So this guy right here is going to be Workstation. Anything Workstation 9 and above, you should be able to run pretty much every feature that I'm going to be demoing as we go through here. So I think you should be in pretty good shape. Inside of Workstation, you're going to have several several different virtual machines you're going to be running. So you'll have a vCenter install, you'll have a domain controller install, you'll have at least 2 hosts, and this is for doing vMotion between them. And then you'll have some sort of open filer, is a way for you to present shared storage to each one of the hosts, so that you can do vMotion and DRS and other capabilities that are high level. And then the other thing about what Workstation gives you is the ability to create different networks in the virtual network editor. And I'll show you how this works here in just a moment. But the idea behind this is, with the virtual network editor, the way that I have mine set up is I have 5 separate networks inside of VMware Workstation running. I have one for management, I have one for, and I'm going to break them out. Actually, this is 0. 0 is management, and what I do is I bridge the network adapter from the virtual machine into the VMware Workstation so that I can manage the entire environment from my computer. And I'll kind of give you guys a high-level overview of how this works. Then we have VMnet 1, 2, 3, and 4. This guy is used for storage. I could have just written SAN there. This guy here is for vMotion because it's a completely separate network. I have fault tolerance and high availability, and then I have production. So this is how I break it out. So I have 5 different network adapters per host. So I configure these 5 networks inside of Workstation, and then what that gives me the ability to do is, when I'm configuring the host and open filer and the domain controller and vCenter, I can go in and I can create additional network adapters. So I can have for host 1 and host 2, I would have 5 network adapters that I would configure, and I would place network adapter 1 in management, network adapter 2 in the storage network, network adapter 3 in the vMotion network. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to logically separate the traffic inside of the VMware Workstation environment, so that when I'm doing my storage traffic, my storage connectivity is completely separated from my management and my vMotion traffic. Same thing with fault tolerance and high availability. That traffic is never seen by the production network. And this is how you'd want to do it in a production environment. Now, when we get into the vSphere networking part of this, I will break this down in much more detail. Being a CCIE, networking is kind of what I do. So I'll break this down so it's much easier for you guys to understand. And storage and networking were the 2 most complicated things for me to figure out when I was studying for my VCP, because it didn't make 100% sense. But after you play with it for a while, you start to get the hang of things. So I'll show you what I mean as we go through here, and so you guys understand what all the details are. I've actually got a bunch of virtual machines already running inside of Workstation. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to blow all those away. So I'm going to start out with fresh installs. So I'll show you guys how to install ESXi. I'll show you guys how to install vCenter Server. I'll show you guys how to install the vSphere client, both the web client and the thick client. The thick client being the web client, or the vSphere client that I'm using right now. That's what I'm going to be using here to manage my individual hosts. So if you only have a single host, you're only going to need a vSphere client. So this is the C# client, if you will. I'll show you guys how to install that as well. And this is as we progress through the entire series. So I have dedicated videos set up for that, so that when we go through, you guys will see this. It'll be pretty much laid out in sequential order and logically how you would want to build your network out. So this will be good for those of you that are looking to see how this stuff works and get it situated, so that you're that much better off when you want to start digging into it. Because a lot of times when you start digging into these technologies, you want to know more about them. And so typically, once you get the VCA, you have a pretty strong theoretical understanding of how things work. And then that gives you a very good launching point to go into your VCP. Now, the thing with the VCP exam is it's actually a little more complicated to do than the VCA, for obvious reasons, because it's more detailed look at it. But you're going to want to spend a lot of time digging through the technologies and demoing things, and we'll show you guys how that stuff works later on. So this is basically the environment you're going to be working with as we go progress through. Now this is assuming that this particular box right here, this Windows 7 computer, is a physical computer. Now in my case, Windows 7 that I'm going to be using to demo this stuff is not a physical computer. All this stuff right here, this guy right here is a VM running on this particular host. So when I remote desktop into this virtual machine, I'm remote desktoping into this guy right here, and from there I'm installing a VMware workstation and then multiple virtual machines on top of that. Now you might ask, well, how can you do that? I didn't. A lot of times you'll get a pop-up notice that translation isn't available, or you run into binary issues and things like that. Well, the reason you're getting those issues is because of the fact that you haven't gone into the CPU configuration of that particular VM and exposed the CPU of the virtual machine to the host CPU and expose hardware assisted virtualization. So what you're doing, and the only way you can do that is through the through vCenter server. Whether you have the Windows-based client or you're using the Linux-based appliance, I'll show you both of them as we progress through here. Installation-wise, they're different installs, but when you log into them, they have the same look and feel. They're identical GUI look. Their GUI look is identical, so you can't tell one from the other unless once you log into it. So by doing this here, you'll when you log into vCenter, you'll be able to expose the virtual machine's CPU to the host's hardware assisted virtualization capability. By doing that, you have basically given the virtual machine access to the Intel VT capabilities. This allows you to run nested virtualization inside of your ESXi environment. So by doing that, you are able to run 32-bit operating systems inside of a 64-bit VM. So it gives you that capability of running nested virtualization. Now, if you have a situation where you have a physical box where you want to run workstation on top of that and then run everything inside of it, then you can run 64-bit, because the fact that this particular VM is 64 bits, as you can tell right here. It's a 64-bit install of Windows 7. Now, because of that, I'm already utilizing the 64-bit capabilities. You can't install a 32-bit OS inside of a virtual machine that's running 64-bit. It's not supported. So in this case, we have to run 32-bit OSs inside of our virtual environment inside a workstation, but that's okay. I'm not too concerned about that for a VCA or a VCP testing. If you were looking to take this to the next level of like VCAP or VCIX, VCAP is for the 5.5 variation, and this is for 6.0. This guy right here is for implementation, where the VCA and the VCP are both written exams, meaning you get a scenario-based question and you click a radio button to answer your question. The VCAP 5.5 and the VCIX 6.0 are going to be lab exams. What that means for you is when you go take these tests, you are actually on physical hardware. So when you go to the Peers Review Testing Center to take your test, you're given a series of different lab questions that you actually have to know how to navigate through the GUI. You know, you may have to log into the Power CLI or the vCLI and make different configuration changes. You might have to, you know, configure DHCP through the command line, or, you know, whatever the case might be. Everything is lab-based. There's no written. It's all lab. So it's basically CCIE for the VMware stuff. So typically the way that I break this down, if you're familiar with the Cisco world, this is configured as your CCENT. This is configured as your CCNA. And then these guys are a mix of your CCNP or your CCIE, depending on how you want to look at it. Some might say, well, VCDX is CCIE, VCAP is CCNP. That's fair. I would accept that answer. I guess it depends on how you look at it. You know, and there's VCDX, which is VMware's top-end certification, like CCIE is for Cisco. Because I have actually every one of these, CCNA, CCENT, CCNP, CCIE. That's how I basically gauge their their equivalency in that regard. Now, VCDX is a design expert, which I would equate to CCDE. and there's CCDEs, the design expert level design exam from Cisco. There's not very many of those guys out there, so if you see a CCDE, they're even more rare than a CCIE. So that's how I would equate that to it. I might be a little off on that, but I haven't dealt with VMware enough to even come close to passing the sanity check that comes into play with the VCDX. And so, like, you have to present to VMware a case study or a design that you worked on, where you went out and deployed this really big virtual environment, and then you're basically grilled by other VCDXs on a panel, and if you do well enough, you earn your VCDX. I don't know much more about it than that, so it's actually kind of cool. I'm thinking maybe down the road I might go after this, but right now I'm very content with the VMware level of understanding that I currently have. I don't play with it enough to go to this level, VGAP or VCDX, but just in case you were interested in knowing how the hierarchy works. So VCA is like CCENT and VCDX is basically CCDE. So that's how I equate them. So if you agree, great. If you don't, that's quite all right. You're entitled to your opinion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and pull up our virtual machine that is going to be running our virtual environment. So as you can see, I have my virtual environment pulled up. Everything's powered off at the moment because the fact that I powered this stuff down just the other day, simply for the fact that I was working on some Cisco stuff, because I'm actually in the process of studying for my service provider CCIE at the moment. So I was bitten by the Cisco bug a long time ago, and studying for your CCIE, you spend a lot of time studying. So I haven't been able to break out of that habit yet. So now, if you didn't know, if you can't notice by looking at this your screen that this is a virtual machine unless you were to click here on the here and right click and go about VMware tools. This tells you this is a virtual machine, and we'll talk about VMware tools much later on in the video series, but this is basically this is how you can verify whether you're on a virtual machine or not, because the fact that just by looking at it, it looks like a regular Windows desktop, except for the fact that I have VMware Workstation pulled up. So let me give you guys a quick breakdown as to what's going on here so you guys have an idea of what you're looking at. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull up my pen pad real quick and break this down so you guys have an idea of what's going on. This admin computer is what we're going to be using for doing all of our administration. DC1 is going to be the domain controller. vCenter 6 is running the Windows-based vCenter server. We have ESXi 6-1 and 6-2. These guys are going to be our ESXi hosts running instead of workstation. I have OpenFiler. This guy is there for providing shared storage for both our iSCSI and our NFS capabilities as we go through that. vCenter 5.5 and 5.5.2, because I'm studying for my VCAP, I'm utilizing these three VMs as a way to study for that particular test. Although I'm actually going to be buying physical hardware to fill these roles, because I'm noticing pretty severe performance degradation with the fact that everything is running in software and it's really, really slow. And I'm looking for something a little quicker. That is why I'm going to be doing that. So what we have going on here, and I'll show you the virtual network editor to give you an idea of how this stuff breaks down. So basically the idea here with the way this stuff sits is if you were to come into this guy blind, so you don't have anything set up, you have a basic install of VMware Workstation. If you were to click on the Edit tab here and click on Virtual Network Editor, you're going to get this little pop-up window, and this is the Virtual Network Editor. Now, because of the fact that I'm working inside of Workstation 11, and this is on a Windows 7 box, it by default requires you to have administrator privileges to modify network configuration. So I'm just going to click on Change Settings. I'm going to click Yes to accept the end user agreement. And what I have here, and this is what I was talking about earlier when I've bridged the network adapters. So let me go ahead and click on this real quick. I have few different network adapters here. Local area connection. This is my connection to the rest of my virtual environment. So this is the IP address that I connect into the rest of the network with. This is my default gateway. It is not running DHCP, so I have this statically set. What I've done is I've taken this particular network adapter and I have mapped it to the network editor. And by mapping it to the network editor, I have bridged the network adapter for this virtual machine that allows me to get out to the internet to Workstation, which allows all of these VMs, as long as I have a network adapter that is inside of VMnet 0, to access the internet. So it's kind of a cool feature. So if I need to download any updates or patches or anything like that, I have direct access to the internet. So I can give vCenter Server access to the internet directly, and I don't have to go through any back-end Houdini magic to get this stuff to work. So what I've done here is I have 4 different VM nets, and each one of these VM nets is dedicated to a different capability. So this one right here is my storage network. I also have for vMotion, HA and fault tolerance, and then production. So I've configured these guys appropriately, and they're all ready to go, and we are all set with our setup. So what I'm going to do as we go through here, I'm going to show you guys in upcoming videos how to install ESXi 6.1 vCenter Server, the Windows implementation, and the vCenter Server appliance. Once you guys have that in operation, then we'll be good to go. And then once we have all these installs going, I'm also going to finish it up with an open filer once we get into shared storage, because then you'll be able to see how I set it up. Now you can use the Server 2012 R2 server that I'm going to be running for vCenter Server and Domain Controller 1 are both Server 2012 R2. You can use those servers as an iSCSI target. I have chosen not to do that. I don't want to. The benefit to using them as the iSCSI target is you eliminate another virtual machine to provide that capability. So by having these guys act as an iSCSI target, you eliminate the need for OpenFiler. But because of the fact that I happen to like OpenFiler, and it gives me that capability of having an external storage array like you normally would have in your environment. Normally, you would not be using your domain controller as an iSCSI target in production. So what this capability allows me to do is it allows me to spin up as close to a real-world environment as I possibly can. So by doing this, I'm able to go in here and give a lot of capabilities to myself to play with. So we'll see that as we go along. So one of the things we will not be touching on is Fiber Channel, because I don't have the capabilities of demoing Fiber Channel, but we will definitely talk about it in the storage and the networking area. So the last thing I want to show you guys real quick, and this is from this particular virtual machine. I'm going to show you how to navigate to the documentation really quick, and I'll show you guys how to navigate to the hardware compatibility list. So if you've never been to VMware site before and you don't know where to click, that's okay. I'll help you out with that. So the first tab you're going to click on here is Training. So you click on Training, and it pulls up VMware Education. I would recommend you come down here to where is it? I forgot. Or no, I'm sorry. It wouldn't be Training. It would be Support. So Training is if you wanted to know how to navigate to your the VCA exam. So here we have VCA. So if you want to know more about the VCA exam, click on this link right here. For documentation, we're going to click on Support, and we're going to go navigate down to vSphere. That's going to bring us to this guy, and then here we're going to click on vSphere Documentation, and then we're going to click on vSphere 6 Documentation Center. This brings us to this particular page. Now, if you're like me and you don't know how to navigate to the hardware compatibility list, I'm just going to go ahead and quick Google that so you guys can see how this works. So we're going to type in the VMware hardware compatibility, and we're going to click on that, and then we're going to expand this guy out. Now this hardware compatibility guide, let me zoom in a little bit for you guys so you guys can see it a little better. What this guy basically does is you can plug in all of the details for your particular environment, what type of ESXi release you want to run, all the system information you want to put into play, and it will give you the what is supported, what is not supported. So I'm not actually going to play with it, but you would simply come in here and select from everything you've got configured or what you're going to be using, and then go from there. So this will give you the capability of going through and getting your figuring out if the equipment you're about to buy or you already have can support VMware. I can tell you that not everything is on here. So for instance, if I was to click on 6.0 and then I'm using IBM, and if I was to click on, this is going to be rack or tower or rack mount, and I'm going to be using all features, and then I'm going to be using all this. I'm going to use, it's going to be 2 sockets, and it's going to be 4 cores per socket, and I'm using Intel's at the bottom here. I'm using Intel Xeon 5500 series, and I'll talk about EVC later on, but basically EVC allows you to if you have later models, so let's say you're on like this E7, which is like one of the more later versions of Intel processors. If let's say you have an IBM server that's running this particular model of CPU, and you have another IBM server that is running on the 5500 series. Well, because the 5500 series doesn't have the same capabilities that the E7 does, you can use EVC to downgrade the E7 to the 5500. Basically, you're dumbing down the CPU capabilities. And I'm going to go and I'm going to use all for that. I'm going to click update and review results. And right now, basically, it says no matches. There's no matches, but that's okay, because as you can clearly tell, I am running VMware ESXi 6.0 here on an IBM server. So even though it doesn't show up on the supported HCL, it doesn't mean you can't run it. You just may have issues when you are running it. So just keep that in mind. So that is the HCL.